Hello everyone. Today I'm going to take some time to review with you an understanding of HRM. I'm often asked why in the first 3 weeks of the course we go through foundational concepts. The first week is the foundation of HRM, or Human Resource Management. The second week is the foundation of Excel. And the third week is the foundation of HRIS, or databases, specifically relational databases. And my answer is a simple one. In order to really understand the nature of this course, to really grasp it well, you need to have these 3 items as a foundation. So today, I'm going to walk through you an understanding of HRM, or Human Resource Management. To understand the HRIS, the Human Resource Information System, you need to have a foundational understanding of what human resource management is all about. And that's whether you are an HR student, a business student, or an MIS student. So I do have a PowerPoint that is uploaded on your Canvas course, and I will be referring to that as I walk you through just a basic understanding of HRM. I'm not going to really get into a full hour and a half lecture on HRM. I will point out some important features, and I would expect that you would follow up on those features and look into them. We'll start right off the top with what is human resource management, and I always want you to really look at it in a simple graphic way of a triangle. Human resource management is all about 3 things: risk management, being an employee advocate, and being an advocate of management. Very difficult to navigate through that, especially between being an employee advocate and being an advocate of management. But that is primarily what an HR person is responsible for. And in many organizations, HR folks are underappreciated. Of these 3 items, clearly risk management is very, very crucial. And in using an HRIS, the HR person will identify situations where risk management will come into play. Now, there's a lot of formal definitions of HRM. Here is one right here. But I want you to just think of HRM in this term right here: risk management, employee advocate, and management advocate. And when it comes to the employee advocate and management advocate, you have to know when that comes into play. So with that understanding, there's several components of HRM. And one of the first and major components is recruitment, and that includes external recruitment and internal recruitment. This is recruiting candidates for vacancies or openings, and you're either going to look outside the company, which is external recruitment, or inside the company, which is internal recruitment. Now, the HRIS that we will interact with this semester in the course does not have a recruitment or selection module, but I will show you one with ADP. So recruitment, very, very important. And of course, when we talk about recruitment, think back to that triangle: risk management, management advocate, and employee advocate. From a risk management standpoint, there's a lot of rules and regulations and laws on how you go about recruitment, and especially how you go about selection. Taking a look at selection tools, you will see that there are selection tools that an HR person will use. They consist of background information, references, paper tests, physical ability tests, performance tests, and interviews. Usually what will occur is the HR person will focus on interviews and background information. In some cases, they will check references, but the reference that a good HR professional will check will always be a previous employer. Now, some employers will assess a candidate or applicant's skill level, and these assessments fall into play down here with performance tests, physical ability tests, and paper tests. There are rules and regulations, again, that address this, and you have to be very, very careful. All of these assessments have to be position-based. They also have to be validated studies, mathematically validated to ensure that there's no discrimination. A classic example is to give a person who's applied for a custodial position a accounting test, knowing that they will fail simply because you didn't want to hire that individual. That would be discriminatory. So the test has to align with the position, the job description, and the test has to be validated mathematically, and that is quite a lengthy process. If HR ever uses assessments, and usually they will use third-party vendor assessments, they'll purchase assessments from another company. Again, a good HR professional will make sure that they have the validation studies for review. Selection process. The selection process, again, we talked about it: background information, interview, physical ability test, some more assessments, and again, reliability and validity of the assessment is very, very critical. Now, there are some terms that come into play for HRM, really depending on the organization. One term, of course, is labor union. I've been fortunate enough to have worked in organizations where there have been no labor unions. And that gives the organization a little bit more flexibility, especially on the pro or good side. Another very important term is the BFOQ, or bona fide occupational qualification. And this is where individual characteristics necessary for performance of job requirements will be looked at. So, for example, a few years back, the airline industry would only hire certain individuals to be airline attendants, or stewardesses as they used to refer to them. These usually were females, and the airline industry set physical requirements in terms of height and weight. And what they claimed was that doing so was a BFOQ, a bona fide occupational qualification. Well, in time, that was found not to be true, that there was no such BFOQ, and the airline industry had to change their ways. There's also been lawsuits against the restaurant chain Hooters because of how they addressed the BFOQ issue in their hiring, and again, lost out as well. So an HR professional may be faced with a hiring manager in their organization pointing out certain qualifications or physical attributes that they want in candidates. And the HR professional in many cases will have to push back, addressing it as a BFOQ or not as a BFOQ. How do you know if it is a BFOQ? Has to be reasonable, legitimate. It cannot be discriminatory. And it has to be codified or written in the job description. Another important aspect is what is an individual versus an independent contractor. And here we're talking about Amazon delivery people, UPS delivery folks, FedEx delivery folks, Uber or Lyft drivers. Are they employees or independent contractors? An organization will always want a person to be an independent contractor. Then they don't have to worry about benefits and other things like having to pay certain taxes. From an employee versus independent contractor perspective, really this is the test here. The company and the DOL and IRS will look at these items. At the end of the day, how an individual is paid, who provides expertise to the individual in that individual doing the work, who provides the tools and resources required for the job, who provides supervision and direction, and who pays the person. All of that figures into deciding whether the employee or whether the person is an employee or independent contractor. When we talk about what is an employee versus an independent contractor, we have to take a look, and you will see that on this slide, 5 aspects that will be reviewed by the IRS and the DOL. This will apply to drivers for UPS, FedEx, Amazon. This will apply to Uber or Lyft drivers. It's going to really apply to any company also who uses temp individuals, folks that are short-term helpers that are recruited and selected by a temp agency, or even if a company actually brings someone on with the intent to hire them on a regular basis, but they go through a temp agency. How the IRS and DOL will look at the person is in 2 different ways. So the IRS will determine or define the employer as that entity that actually pays the person. So a temp person working at XYZ company is actually paid by the temp agency. The IRS would say the employer is the temp agency. However, where the person works, the person is being supervised by employees of XYZ company. Those supervisors are providing the person with direction and supervision. XYZ company is providing tools and resources to the person. Therefore, the DOL will call the company, XYZ company, as the employer versus the temp agency. So 2 different perspectives. One thing that HR professionals always have to recognize and realize is this, that the employer is responsible for the work environment. So discrimination, sexual harassment can happen to a temp person regardless of how the IRS or DOL defines who the employer is. Continuing on, HR organizations also are usually responsible for some element of training and development, and that's important to recognize. Most HRISs will have a section on training and development. Companies will want to track the training and development of their employees. Types of development: we have varied work experiences and formal education. So organizations will look to provide their employees, move them around to different positions so that they can really better understand the organization and perhaps find a better fit. And many organizations will also provide formal education or even education at the workplace. Job analysis is an important part of HRM. It is basically the definition or defining of a position, the characteristics of the job, requirements of the job, reporting relationships of the job, expectations of the job. That is basically your job description. Once that is defined, the HR professional will go through a FLSA status test. FLSA stands for Fair Labor Standards Act, and will determine if the position is paid by the hour or is paid by the week or on a salary basis. And a wage or a wage range will be determined. A lot of this information that we see on this slide goes into an HRIS, and we will see that when we begin to explore the HRIS. Performance appraisal and evaluation. All organizations have some form of performance evaluation. Again, a very important component of HRM, but also of an HRIS. Pay and benefits we see in these slides, also very, very important. From a pay standpoint, we look at base wage and incentive pay. From a variable incentive pay, we can see that there are very different systems that are used. Pay and benefits, the benefits that an employee is enrolled in, also very important to track on an HRIS, and we will see that with our HRIS. Definition of what an employee is on this slide, very important, and what an independent contractor is. And again, given the choice, companies would love to have their individuals as independent contractors, and you can see why here. Now, also very important are the legal ramifications. This is really the risk management, a major part of the risk management part of that triangle. And hopefully, as you've seen, there's a lot of risk management, even in pay, benefits, BFOQs, job analysis, and so forth. On these next slides, I'll quickly walk you through the legal aspects of risk management for the HR professional, and how we will see later on in the course how the HRIS will help the professional in reporting requirements. Very, very important is Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination in employment based on race, color, sex, national origin, or religion, and prohibits sexual harassment. And that applies to employers with 15 or more employees. Civil Rights Act of 1991 strengthened the civil rights law, created a concept of disparate impact, which you can read here. And under this act, employers must prove that their practices are based on job qualifications. Definition of harassment, and by now many of you have taken courses that have addressed harassment and also sexual harassment, and you'll see the definitions here. Keep in mind, in New York State, employers have a higher bar when it comes to sexual harassment, and actually all employers have to provide sexual harassment prevention training for all employees annually. Hostile environment is one aspect of sexual harassment, and you will see the definition here: unwelcome discriminatory conduct or sexual conduct that unreasonably interferes with an individual's job performance. Hostile environment is the largest form of sexual harassment currently. The other form of sexual harassment is quid pro quo, and that is secondary in terms of complaints to the EOC in New York State DHR. Age discrimination applies to employers with 20 or more employees, and that prohibits discrimination against those 40 years or older. So once you hit 40 years of age, you are protected by the Age Discrimination Act. Americans with Disabilities Act applies to employers with 15 or more employees, and you'll see the definition here. Family Medical Leave Act applies to employers of 50 or more employees, and you'll see its application here. Pregnancy Discrimination Act, 15 or more employees. Equal Pay Act, very critical, and very critical from an HRIS standpoint, because the HR professional is always having to look at wages, how people are paid, and compare that to the position the person holds against other individuals and the other individual's gender, age, and ethnic background. USERA, which applies to all employers, and that's specific to uniform services. Fair Labor Standard Act is huge. That restricted child labor. It also defined 40 hours as a work week. It also defined overtime. Later revisions and iterations of the Fair Labor Standards Act got into exempt versus non-exempt and further definitions. Social Security Act, definition here. Workers' compensation. Keep in mind anyone who is injured or becomes ill on the job due to a work-related action may receive workers' compensation that is handled through a third-party insurance carrier and is overseen by each individual state work comp boards. That always ties in with OSHA. OSHA regulations and rules applies to employers with 10 employees or more. And this slide shows and talks about the various types of leaves, and you'll see in New York State we have to add the paid family leave. Now keep in mind, due to COVID-19, there are other types of leaves and laws, rules and regulations that are out there both at the federal level and state level, and we'll talk about them a little bit more in the course. So please take some time to go through this presentation. If you have any questions about any of the concepts, don't hesitate to email me or pop in during virtual office hours, and I'll be glad to answer those questions for you. Thank you very much.